Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth for the 3DS. This title was sent to me by NISAmerica so that I could give it a look and tell you guys my opinions on it. And as you guys are probably aware, ever since I played Persona 4 Golden, I've become very much a fan of the Persona series, even though I haven't really played any of the other titles before, and I know that there's going to be a lot of hardcore Persona fans out there saying, you can't call yourself a Persona fan, you only played Persona 4, and it's like, I'm sorry that I'm somehow, that it somehow hurts your feelings, the fact that I am able to enjoy a series having only played one of the titles, but that's fine, I'm sure you'll live through that. But getting right on back to the topic, what is Persona Q Shadow of the Labyrinth all about? It is very much an RPG in line with what you've come to expect from other Persona titles, with the exception that, at least with Persona 4 and I believe Persona 3 as well, you were playing mostly from a third-person perspective of the main character, and you would be, you would be exploring the world as well as dungeons from that third-person perspective. In this one, you are actually going to be playing it as a first-person, old-school dungeon crawler style, which, if you guys don't know, it is the one that you can only move left, right, front, back. It's not like you can actually control the character; you just move in a tile-based space. For those of you who are familiar with the game, it is kind of like Etrian Odyssey. As a matter of fact, that is going to be a name that you will be hearing quite a bit throughout this video. But before we get into more details about the combat and all that, I would just like to mention that in Persona Q, you're going to have both the characters from Persona 3 as well as Persona 4. Now, the way this is going to work is you're going to select which perspective you want to have while you play the game. So you can either play the game from the perspective of the characters from Persona 3, or you can play the game from the perspective of the characters from Persona 4. Now, me personally, having played Persona 4 previously, I decided to go with the cast from Persona 4 because these are characters that I'm familiar with, and it gets me more invested into the game. Now, if you are a bigger fan of the Persona 3 title, then you might want to pick the Persona 3 characters, which come with their I'm not sure if they're called persona injectors, whatever the things that they aim to their head and like shoot, and that brings out their personas. They have that stuff for those characters, but I haven't really played as those yet, so I don't want to go too deep into that. Now, beyond the casts from both Persona 3 and Persona 4, you also have two new characters, which are Rei and Zen. Now, these are characters that I believe haven't been in a Persona title before, but don't quote me on that because I could be terribly wrong. But I do believe this is the first title that these characters show up in. And these two characters, they very much work as one character in terms of combat. It is just like you control both of them when you are in a combat situation. Now, the game will mesh the universe and characters of the Persona series with the gameplay of Etrian Odyssey. Now, this is something that I just looked online to see what kind of gameplay Etrian Odyssey was, because I never really played Etrian Odyssey, if I'm to be completely honest. But that basically means that the gameplay style is, like I said, the first-person, old-school dungeon crawler style where you just move forward tile by tile, and you get to look around and see what's in the scenario. There's going to be a lot of secret passageways through labyrinths and stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of enemies, random encounters. And there's also a very interesting mechanic that I've never really experienced before. Like I said, this mechanic was present in Etrian Odyssey. I just never played Etrian Odyssey before. I mean, I've only recently acquired a 3DS. So this mechanic that I'm talking about is that you're actually going to have to map out the dungeon on the lower screen of the 3DS. Now, this seems like somewhat of a daunting task, maybe. At least for me, I was like at the start of when they first introduced this mechanic, there's a character saying, "Oh, maybe I can draw out the dungeon for you," and I'm like, "Yes, do that. I don't want to have to draw out the dungeon." And the game's like, "No, the leader should draw out the dungeon." I'm like, "What? Come on!" So you do have to draw out the dungeon. You have to pull out the old stylus, and you have to actually like draw it. They have a bunch of tools that you can use. Like the basic tool is you just, the thing works as in you have this spreadsheet-like thing at the bottom of the screen. And you can just like draw the dungeon on. It's not like it's going to be drawn very poorly or anything. You're essentially drawing on a, you know those sheets that you use for solving math problems? I don't know what the exact term is for those sheets in English, but it's one of those. And as you put your little markings on the sheet, they basically become very geometrically correct. And then they also have stuff that you can put in, like they have doors, they have stairways, they have circles, squares, and all kinds of annotations that you can do as you go through this dungeon. And that is actually a very interesting mechanic. Like, I hadn't really done anything like that before, and at the start I was like, oh, this is going to be so boring. But it does give you some of that pen and paper feeling from like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. So it is something that I found, I don't really mind it as much as I thought I would. I at the start, when I found out that I had to do this, I was like, oh man, this is going to be so boring. This is going to be terrible. I don't want to do this. And then I was like, oh, I need to draw out this little piece of the dungeon. Oh, I haven't explored this portion. I should go over here and draw out this piece of the dungeon. And it becomes a cool little mini game almost. And so far, I haven't really gotten bored of that particular mechanic. I like marking stuff out and be like, oh, there was a secret passageway over here. So eventually I'm going to have to go around somewhere and I'm going to be able to activate this secret passage to come back through here. And this is going to enable me to navigate the labyrinth in this way. And it's a neat mechanic that I wasn't expecting to enjoy as much as I have. Now, in terms of actual combat, I mean, you're going to be exploring this dungeon, like I said, old school first-person dungeon crawler. I mean, the footage that I'm splicing into this video should show you what the gameplay is like. As you are navigating through this dungeon, you're going to encounter random enemies. There's also going to be a couple of special enemies that are on screen that I haven't really fought yet. They're called FOEs, or foes. And they're supposed to be these super powerful enemies that you're supposed to avoid. Now, on a regular game, I would usually just go right up against them and fight them. But since one of my first experiences with Persona 4 Golden was essentially like, oh, you're going to fight this thing, this extra boss that showed up on the TV world. And I went up to that boss and he just like stomped me dead in seconds. Like, there wasn't even a chance to actually fight. I don't remember the actual name of him. He was like this card dude, like the card king or something. I can't remember what the name of the boss was, but I remember him just like stomping me dead. There was not even a chance that I would ever win that battle. And that's kind of like what I'm thinking at the moment that FOEs are. So I don't want to mess with those until I get a better idea if I can actually just beat the crap out of them or not. So that is going to be something that I might leave for later on. I mean, at this point, I'm like 5 hours into the game, which when you're talking about a Persona title, you're still just very much scratching the surface. So just to kind of give you just to kind of situate you as to where I am in terms of, you know, progression and whatnot. So the combat should be fairly familiar if you've played a Persona title before. I mean, you get the initiative thing, and then you get to select which actions each character is going to perform. They have a couple of new systems in place, like they have this thing where as you win subsequent fights, you're going to get this special skill that you can use as the leader of the party, which for my case, I've chosen the Persona 4 cast. I'm not sure if this skill changes or not, but the skill that I currently have is Spotlight, which allows me to decide, okay, next turn, this person gets to do their action first. And you guys are like, oh, that doesn't seem that important. It actually is, because let's say, okay, you have a healer in your party, and you just like decide, okay, I want this person to play first so that they can heal me before anything happens in the combat that could kill that one character that is badly wounded or something like that. So that's usually when I tend to use that particular ability, or if I know that I can get a killing blow on a specific monster with a skill from a specific party member, I might use the ability then as well. So that is one of the new mechanics. Apart from that, you have your regular, you know, attack monsters. You have different types of attacks like slashing, piercing, bashing, all those different kinds of things. And different kind of attacks will deal damage in different ways, which will matter because certain monsters might be weak to piercing, other monsters might be weak to bashing. So, you know, doing the whole mix and match of your your attacks that have the greatest advantages against the enemies that have the greatest weaknesses to those attacks is still very important. And this is obviously still important from an elemental perspective, because you're also going to have lightning attacks, you're going to have poison attacks, you're going to have fire attacks, ice attacks, all the stuff that you've come to expect from Persona titles. I'm not sure if this kind of stuff is also present in Etrian Odyssey, but I'm going to assume it is. You know, the elemental oppositions and stuff. I'm assuming that is also present in Etrian Odyssey. But yeah, that is going to be the type of combat that you can expect. Now, beyond the regular combat that you've seen in Persona titles, there is also an added layer of strategy, which is a formation. So in the previous title that I played from Persona, which was Persona 4, like I said, you would control a four-member party. In this game, you're going to be controlling 5 members on your party, and you're going to have to place them in a formation where you put 3 of your members in front and 2 of your members in the back. So there's a couple of additional combat consequences there for having people in the front or having people in the back. Obviously, you want to have the ranged people in the back. You want to have the melee people in the front kind of act almost like a shield, but they can still target the people in the back. But there's a couple of bonuses and debuffs and whatnot for attacking people that are actually behind you. And your enemies will also show up in different formations. Like you might have 2 people in the front, 1 guy in the back. You might have 1 guy in the front, 2 guys in the back. So that changes quite a bit. And an interesting thing that I've noticed, this I've only noticed on the characters of Rei and Zen so far, is that they have specific skills that allow them to actually hit the people in the front line and the people in the back line at the same time, which is pretty damn cool. They also had an AoE ability that allows me to just shoot lightning to the people in the back row if I want to. So the Rei and Zen characters have a little bit more developed abilities that I haven't really seen in the other characters at this time. Now, something that changes in terms of mechanics as well is that you can now, in Persona 4, your main character was able to have like 4 or 5 personas. I can't remember how many you could have equipped at any time, but you were able to have a lot of personas equipped on your main character, and you could like switch between them as you were doing combat. This time around, however, it doesn't work like that. Each of the characters is going to be able to have 2 personas associated with them. However, they're all locked into their main persona. So for instance, your main character in Persona 4 is going to be stuck with Izanagi regardless of what you do. Like Kanji will be stuck with his like skull looking dude. I haven't played with Kanji too much, to be completely honest. Chie has Tomoe. I don't remember all the weird names, but I think that Yosuke had Jiraiya. But on top of all the main personas that each of the characters has, which are the same as your as the main personas that they are presented with on their respective Persona titles. At least I'm assuming this for the Persona 3 characters, but for the Persona 4, they're definitely the same personas that you had in Persona 4. And beyond those personas, you're going to be able to have 1 additional persona for every character. So each character is going to have 2 personas, and you can use abilities from both personas at the same time. There's no need to actually switch personas, so that gives you an additional layer of strategy as well. So you might want to have someone with an ice persona, someone with a fire persona, you know, that kind of stuff, and mix and match to optimize your party and have a balance of abilities so that you can take on a wider variety of foes. Now, I've been playing in normal difficulty, and so far the game has been challenging, but not like crushingly challenging. Because Persona games are just challenging, at least from my experience from Persona 4 again. They are just challenging from the get-go. They're not like terribly hard, but they are challenging even in normal difficulties, which is why I started playing on normal. If, however, you are like a Persona expert and an Etrian Odyssey expert, there are higher levels of difficulty that you can go through if you so desire, and I leave that completely up to you, good sir. But, yeah, so there's going to be the 2 persona mechanic that you will have to assign 2 personas for each of the characters, except for Rei and Zen. Rei and Zen don't actually have a persona, which that is actually a subject of debate on a lot of the plot sections of the game. They're actually debating, how can you guys fight shadows if you don't have a persona? How does that work? Etc., etc. So there's a lot of, you know, like mystery behind that, and I'm not going to reveal too much about that particular aspect of it. In terms of characters, I mean, Zen is very much a very silent character, and his weapon of choice is like this crossbow that he can shoot. And Rei kind of reminds me a lot of Chie, because she is just eating all the time, essentially, and she just wants more and more food. And she's like, oh, this donut was delicious. I need more donuts. I need more meat, and all that we've come to expect. Beyond just having personas, you collect personas as you proceed through the labyrinth and you defeat enemies. Now, once you collect personas, you will also be able to fuse personas, just like in Persona 4, and I'm assuming Persona 3. Whoa. And I'm assuming Persona 3 before it. So you'll be able to fuse personas. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they actually implemented StreetPass with Persona Q, and that allows you to kind of like set a persona that you can share with people as you cross them through StreetPass. So those personas will just appear on your compendium. Say you cross with someone who has a persona that they're sharing, you're going to get that persona on your compendium, and I'm assuming that you'll be able to use it. Now, like I've mentioned, I don't get a lot of StreetPass action where I live, so that is not something that I have a lot of experience in. However, there's also another functionality that allows you to use QR codes to import personas from other people. Now, I wouldn't really advise this on a first playthrough, because from what I can tell, you can just import like a level 99 persona and just crush through the game if that is something that you're looking to do. And I would highly not advise you to do that, because there's a ton of persona codes online that you can just import those into your playthrough and just crush through the game if you so desire. But again, that is not really my style, so that is not something that I've delved into too much. The Persona Fusion works very much the same way that you've seen it in other Persona titles. You fuse up to, I mean, I think on this one, though, it might be a little bit more limited, because I remember that in Persona 4, you could fuse up to like 5 personas at once or something ridiculous like that. On this one, it seems like you can only fuse 2, at least at the point of the game that I'm at right now. Remember, I'm only 5 hours into the game, so things could and will most definitely change further on, but right now I can only fuse 2 personas to make a new persona. But it's got that aspect to it that you can fuse personas and get new personas, and you know, the kind of stuff that we've come to expect from Shin Megami Tensei games. Now, even though you experience most of the game in first person, like when you're going through the labyrinth and whatnot, when you are in combat, you will also experience the fights in first person, like you will see the enemies directly in front of you, and you don't actually see your characters. They do come up whenever there's a combat animation. Now, this is a big deal for me personally. I'm not sure how many people actually care that much about this kind of stuff, but I like seeing the characters that I'm playing with. That is a big thing to me. For some reason, it just helps me be more immersed into the game, seeing the characters actually doing combat. I'm not a huge fan of just, you know, just having the enemies in front of me and then just having like a slash animation whenever I attack. Not a huge fan of that, but showing the actual characters, which is what happens with Persona Q. Whenever a character attacks, the character actually jumps up and shows up in the screen and actually attacks the enemy. And you can see the animation. Like I said, I'm a very animation-driven guy, so if I can see the characters showing up and whatnot, that actually does quite a lot for me personally. Whether or not it's the same case for you, I don't know. But the characters actually showing up and, you know, doing battle and whatnot is a big deal for me. You still have the same combat mechanics that if you're able to put the negative element on all your enemies and they like all become stunned or whatever, you can do like an all-out attack. Every now and then characters will become inspired and they'll be like, oh, I can do my special thing, and you can have one of those characters show up in there and just beat the crap out of the enemies. Those things still happen as well as you are going through the game. So mechanically, that is kind of how you can expect the game to behave. Personally, in terms of my personal opinion, I like it. I wasn't expecting to like it as much. I had played the game back in Gamescom 2014, and I was like, it's just one of those games that it doesn't really, it doesn't demo very well. You need to actually spend quite a few hours in the game to understand how it works and to really get into it. It's one of those more slow burners than necessarily one of those games you can just pick up and be like, oh yeah, I see how this works. So when I played at Gamescom 2014, I was like, I'm not so sure I like this. But when I started playing it by myself and actually, you know, spending a couple of hours with, I'm like, this is actually really cool. So that is something that you can expect from this game. But yeah, in my opinion, I really like it. I wasn't expecting, like I said, I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I do, but it's just one of those things like Persona. After you having played a Persona title, if you enjoyed it, it seems that further titles from the Persona universe just kind of draw you in. It is either it be from the art style, which the art style on this game is actually quite different than the art style on Persona 4. It is a very much more chibi art style with, younger looking characters. Even though they're the same characters, it's like a caricature of a younger version of those characters. And their features are a little bit more exaggerated and whatnot. And it's an art style that not everybody is going to enjoy. I thought I might have a problem with it, but after putting a couple of hours in, I'm like, no, it just looks just fine to me. My one concern I have with it, though, is that the 3D aspect of it doesn't seem to work as well as with the other titles. It doesn't have as much of a depth to it. It is very much a less intensive 3D, if you guys can understand what I'm saying. But the problem I had with it is that it didn't seem to really be doing the tracking all that well, which is weird because I thought that would be more of a console feature and not necessarily something that would change depending on the game. But for me, for some reason, I had a couple of issues with the 3D. However, you can still turn off the 3D. And in this game, it's not really a big deal. 3D, 2D, you kind of don't see a huge difference. I mean, it still does a depth thing, and I tend to play more with 3D on than off. But it's not as big of a deal as in other titles, in my personal opinion. But yeah, having said that, I like the art style. I mean, it's something that kind of grew on me. And it's one of those things that I just kind of relate to the characters from Persona 4 because I spent a lot of time playing Persona 4. On top of that, there's also the soundtrack, in which some soundtracks are familiar. Some tracks are familiar. Other tracks are not familiar. They're new, but in general, I like the soundtrack quite a bit. And it's just one of those things that when I started playing the game and I first started hearing the music from the soundtrack, it just kind of pulled me in. It just hooked me. I mean, you could almost say that even if I wasn't enjoying the gameplay as much, the soundtrack on Persona Q is so good that I might have just kept playing just for the soundtrack. That's how good that is. And I'm usually not a person that's that much driven by soundtrack. So there's that. Now, in terms of story, if you guys are curious what the story of this one is all about, I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything, just going to say a couple of things from the very first hour or so of the game. But essentially, the characters depending on which cast you chose. So I don't know exactly what happens if you chose the Persona 3 cast, but with the Persona 4 cast, your characters find themselves trapped in an alternate version of Yasogami High, and they're forced to explore a labyrinth that's full of shadows and dangers in order to try and find a way out. There's going to be facilities that you can use in between your expeditions to the labyrinth, such as the workshop, which allows you the very same functionality that you had in Persona 4 with the shop, the guy that made weapons and stuff. So that is the workshop. You can make and sell weapons there. You will sell your materials there, and selling materials will unlock weapons. Very much, like I said, in line with what you've seen in Persona 4. Beyond the workshop, there's the nurse's office, which is just to heal your party members, because in between trips to the labyrinth, you will have to come back to heal your party members, as well as regain mana and stuff like that, or even revive party members in case they fall during battle. Beyond that, there's also the Velvet Room, which manages, Persona Fusion and all the StreetPass functionality is managed from the Velvet Room. And then there's also a party screen that allows you to kind of organize your party in terms of formation and which members you will be taking with you to the labyrinth. But yeah, essentially the flow of the game so far for me has been to go from story narrative into the labyrinth, into some more story narrative, and back into the labyrinth. So it's kind of like this mix of telling a story and then going back into the action and then coming back out. And as you progress through the different floors of the labyrinth, usually at the start of each floor, the game will tell you, it's going to give you a reason to go back up. And the interesting thing about that is that whenever you go back to the labyrinth, you can just start at the last floor you were in. So it's kind of like a little bit of a checkpoint thing. Also, if you're curious about how the save system works, whenever you're out of the labyrinth, you can freely save whenever you want. However, when you're in the labyrinth, you can only save once, and the only purpose of you saving is to quit the game. As a matter of fact, whenever you save inside the labyrinth, the game kicks you out, and when you load back into the labyrinth from that particular save, the game deletes that save file and forces you to save again So there's no like, oh, I'll just save this here and then I will, keep on exploring. And if something bad happens, I'll just reload. No, it doesn't work like that. Whenever you save, the game essentially quits you out unless you are not inside the labyrinth, at which point you are free to save whenever you want. There's not as much emphasis on social activities as I've seen in previous titles. The gameplay seems to go more in the route of Etrian Odyssey when it comes to that kind of stuff. There are still a lot of character interactions, a lot of character banter, which reminds you of the characters that you are that these characters are the characters that you've known from previous games, at least in the case of Persona 4. That is definitely what I've experienced so far. So beyond the whole social activities thing, eventually whatever cast you chose will meet up with the other cast. I haven't really gotten to that part yet, but I really, really can't wait to see what happens because essentially the Persona 4 cast is going to meet the Persona 3 cast, and I really want to see that because I've always been curious about the Persona 3 cast. I actually own the Persona 3 game on PlayStation 3. I just never got around to playing it. But I've always been curious about those characters with the injectors and shooting themselves in the head and all that stuff. So I can't wait for that particular portion of the game. Overall, my impression so far is if you like Persona games, you are most likely going to enjoy Persona Q. If you like Etrian Odyssey, I'm going to assume that most likely you're going to enjoy Persona Q as well. But yeah, that's all that I've played of Persona Q so far, and I have to say I'm really, really enjoying myself with it, and I would recommend it at this point if you have a 3DS. The game plays great. I like the gameplay style, and it has just tons and tons of content, particularly if you take into consideration that you can play through the game as the cast of Persona 4, and then you can go back and play through the game as the cast of Persona 3, and you're going to have somewhat of a different experience. And the dungeon drawing mechanic is also pretty interesting, so there's that to it as well. But yeah, that's Persona Q, Shadow of the Labyrinth for the 3DS. I like it, and I think if you like Persona games, you're probably going to like it too. As per usual, leave me all your comments, feedback, all that kinds of good stuff in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.